Hey everyone, today I'm going to be going through my favorite slash the best everyday slash natural eyeshadow palettes. So I'm basically going to be showing you my favorite everyday palettes. Now, if you don't know, I am someone who really prefers bright eyeshadows to natural. So for me to have an everyday palette, typically it will have color in it. That being said, I went through my whole collection and found my personal favorite, like if I was going to do a natural look, what palette would I use? Particularly palettes that have a pop of color and natural shades so I can do the best of both worlds. These are just some of the eyeshadow palettes, so I'm going to be going through them. I'm going to rank them. I'm going to tell you which ones I love and which ones I like but are still not my favorite. So if you want to see what the best natural slash everyday eyeshadow palette is, in my opinion, just keep watching. So these are the palettes that when I went through my entire makeup collection, I decided that these are what I would consider everyday palettes. They might not be everyday palettes to everyone, obviously. I mean, there's bright shades too, but for me, these are what I would pick as my everyday palette. So we're going to go through each of them and I'm going to tell you which ones that I love the most. So to start, we have the Nikita Dragon and Morphe palette. When I saw this palette, I wasn't at first really intrigued by it. I mean, it's pretty, but there are too many natural shades in my opinion. But honestly, thinking about it now, that's kind of what makes this palette cool. Like, because you have like all of these natural shades, but then you also have all these pops of colors. So you can do the most natural look ever. You could just do a simple matte natural look, or you could add a pop of color like in the crease, in the lower lash line, in the inner corner. Like, you have options with this palette, and that's what I personally like about it. Of course, it wouldn't be a best palette video if ColourPop wasn't involved. A palette that I immediately thought of when I was thinking about natural palettes was the Disney Masquerade palette. It's just a stunning natural palette. You have your natural shades, but then you also have these like little bit pops of color. Like you have this like deep like maroon, you have a darker red, and then you have this really dark blue, plus you have this like greeny teal shades. So I definitely think that this is like a perfect natural palette. Like, you have your natural shades, but then you also have some other colors to go with it. When I think of a nude or natural palette, probably the first thing I think about is the Huda Beauty New Nude palette. It is one of my absolute favorites. I do really like this palette. I don't really get use out of it because of the fact that I do mainly do bright looks, but these shades are awesome. I love that this is like a purpley toned natural palette. I just think that for me personally, this is like the definition of like a Tasha natural palette. For some reason, my camera, my phone camera is making it look a lot more cool tone than it is. So with flash, you can kind of see it's a little bit more warm tone. I really like it. I like that there are a ton of mattes, but then you also have shimmers. There's some glitters, but I'm not a big fan of pressed glitters, so I don't think I've ever used them. But I do really like this palette. It's pricey, but it would definitely be like one of my favorites for sure. ColourPop whatever is definitely like in the top 5 of my favorites for a natural palette. I like that you do have some like light brown tones, but then you have these like darker red tones as well. So you could totally do a brown look, or you could do a reddy brown look, or you could do like a red look. Like, I love that. I love that it has like an inner corner highlight. Is this? Yeah, it does have a pressed glitter, but you know. Oh my gosh, I just realized that there's a Billie Eilish reference. Bad guy. Duh. Okay, I love that. That's awesome. This is definitely one of my favorite ColourPop palettes ever. It's a beautiful natural palette, and this is definitely one of my favorite. Melt Cosmetics has some stunning eyeshadow palettes. Two of my favorites on the more natural side are definitely 420 and She's in Parties. 420 has such beautiful warm brown tones, but then they also have like a pop of yellow, and then they have like pops of green as well. So I really like this as a natural palette because I could do a really beautiful warm brown look, but then I also have a yellow, I have greens, so there's so many like more options because of me being someone who wants a bright color story. As soon as you add in like a green and yellow, I am down. And then She's in Parties is obviously like a purple toned palette, which is why I love it. I love purple, so of course having a natural sort of purple palette gives me life. Mercury Retrograde by Huda Beauty is a palette that is just on the edge of a natural palette, in my opinion. Like, because you have stunning natural shades, but there's only a couple, but then you get into like pastels, like intense bright pastels. So like for me, this is beautiful. Like, I love that you have your natural shades, but then you have all these colors so that you can really bring your look to the next level. And I personally think that this palette, you can have so many different look varieties. Like, you could do a natural look and then you have pops of color, or you could do just a bright look. Like, that is what I love about this palette. I'm not someone who does a lot of natural looks, but when I do, I have enough palettes to know what I want. So the Amrezy palette by ABH is what I would think of as a stunning everyday palette. You have so many beautiful brown tones, but then you have a pop of pink, and then you have like a pop of a metallic blue, a metallic pink, you have a purple, you have a glitter. Like, this is just a very, very stunning everyday palette, in my opinion. It's not a palette that I reach for often, just because it's not a color story that I'm personally the hugest fan of, but I do think that this would be a good everyday palette for the normal person. Of course, I need a palette that has purple tones in it for an everyday palette, so this is the Hello Kitty and ColourPop palette. This is stunning. I love this palette. The shades are really good, and I definitely think for me, like, this is a natural palette. Like, this reminds me a lot of the Stormy palette by Kylie, and honestly, that's an everyday palette for me as well. So I definitely think that this, like, is everyday, like, because you have that pop of peach, you have purple, but then you also have these natural rose shades, which I think would be natural for most people, but, you know, for me, I'm going in with something a little bit more intense. The Raw Beauty Christie palette with ColourPop is one of my favorites, and of course, for me, this is a natural palette. Like, yes, you have these jewel tones, and then you have, like, greens, but you also have these beautiful natural shades, like the yellowy color, you have Puffball, which is a brown, Reiner and Old Growth are also very natural, same with Old Homegrown. I definitely think that this is like a natural palette with like jewel tones in it, and I absolutely adore that. The first look I did with this actually was a natural look. I did like a gold look and I loved it, so this is definitely one of my favorites. Looking at this palette, if you know me, you know that this is up my alley for a natural palette. This is the Morphe Everyday Chic palette, and like in the name, it is everyday chic for me. Like, I love you have these natural shades, but then you have purples, you have greens, you have these beautiful jewel tones, you have some darker tones. Like, you have so many options in this palette alone, and I definitely think that this is a beautiful palette if you like these colors and it is more of a natural sort of vibe. I did also want to mention the Wicked palette by Unicorn Cosmetics, because for me this is an everyday palette. Like, you have natural shades, but then for me you have purples, you have greens, you have that beautiful yellowy green shade. Like, you have so much variety in this palette, and I think for me that's what makes an everyday palette. It's not just something that has natural shades, it's something that has versatility to it. So while for most people this would not be an everyday palette, for me it is. And I'm so bummed because I just gouged out some of these shadows, which makes me sad. But this palette is stunning, and it would be considered an everyday palette, in my opinion. Overall, if you did want me to rank them, there are 12 palettes, so let's do this. I would say, oh, I don't even know how I'm going to do this. Okay, so if I'm doing this, I'm going to go Amrezy at the bottom. So we're going to go from bottom to top. Amrezy, Slay All Day, Mercury Retrograde. Actually, we're gonna have this Princess palette, then Mercury Retrograde, then Nikita Dragon, then we're gonna have the other ColourPop palettes, then we have Nude, then we have Everyday Chic, and then we have Wicked, and then we have 420. So that's my ranking, a quick little semi-ranking going on. But honestly, I love all of these palettes for everyday, so let me know down below if any of these are up your alley, or if you think I'm absolutely crazy for thinking that these are everyday palettes. Of course, this is just my opinion. We all can have different opinions and it doesn't matter. But in my opinion, these are what I would choose for everyday palettes. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you subscribe, comment down below any videos you'd like to see me do. Go follow my Instagram and TikTok, Makeup by TashaXO, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Every time I try to film, there's always a cat. You're a brat. You are? You're a brat.